just because we can see that they are different and thought differently, we can still manage the same thing with both, right? Well, yes. Now, what this one did, we have to look at this again. We want to analyze what actually happens. Well, it tells your children they are supposed to be in a grid, which gives suddenly by saying so, the parent has decided it can decide a lot more. And so then it says all the children should be in a column each. So each individual child should be in their individual column. That's what happens right now. And if you go up here, you no, not just hang on a bit. You see, they don't take up the same small spaces up here, but they're not the same size. The 12 is a bit larger and one is a bit smaller than 12, you see? It has to do with the content because 12 is a larger number, so it takes up more space. But it's around the same amount of space around each number. So they stretch equally, even though they have different sizes originally because of the different sizes of each number. That is what we see here. Now, if we go up and take the next step with Flexbox, let's take this one. And you see that, and we save it. Then suddenly we get the same result. They are identical to one another. So, what is the difference? Well, we can see inside we have display flex, it's the same. Flex structure row, it's the same. And then we have this nested class. You know, you can write classes like this and you'll see them. You've seen a lot of them being written like this. But a modern CSS more looks like this. So you write the nested class inside. And you can see why it works. It actually takes on these items. If I write them outside, like, sorry, I need to, oh, God damn it. This is what I want to do. I need to take this one outside and not just use FlexFlow. Let's use something else like background color red. You can see I don't only affect the flexbox, I'm also flexing the grid. So what I would have had to do is to say flexbox and the item inside flexbox. And in that case, it just takes flexbox. A far easier way to do this is what you saw just now. If I make it nested item. Now I can save it again and you see that actually this red only affects Flexbox because this is actually the same. It's just easier to maintain. You see that this item can be called item. These can be called item as well. But I only have to remember to put this one inside of Flexbox. Like this. So if I change this name, it's going to function still. Whereas if I had this one out here and had a Flexbox written before, and I changed this name, I must also change this name. And then this is just an example. But if you had 1,000 of those, it's an encumbersome thing. This is easier to maintain and it's more scalable. So let's get back to where we were. Not talking about nested CSS nesting. We're talking about this. The thing we added was actually we went to the item and gave them a power. So you'll see this a lot, that Flexbox gives away more power to its children than CSS Grid does. And it's kind of intuitive in a manner because Flexbox was the first one to take away power. It didn't take away all the power from the children. It kept some to them. CSS Grid took the initiative of Flexbox and took more power away from their children. And now I'm not talking about humans. I know I'm talking about code. I shouldn't feel responsible saying take power away from my children. You have to think about it as for what it is. It's code. So Flexbox takes more power, and it takes less power away from the children. So it gave something here. What did it do? Well, children have a lot of things you can add to them in Flexbox. There are a couple of things you can add in CSS Grid as well. We can have something called Flex Shrink. We can have Flex Basis. And there are a couple of more, like we can have Order. We can have a couple of more things going on here. So there are a couple of things we can actually use to control or to set values on children. And of course, you can still put colors on individual children and all of that. So I mean, apart from the layout technique, you can still do whatever you want to do with CSS. But as far as the placement of things and just Flexbox section of the CSS, it allows for this and a couple of more things, of course, inside of each child. Now, I took up these because these are important. FlexGrow is the one I used. FlexGrow, it could say it's a number. You have a 0. That means really that the item is not allowed to grow. And if I remove this for a while and just go and type 0, I believe you recall this for what it was earlier. Earlier on we saw this, exactly this thing. So the only thing we added was saying instead of 0, we said 1, because a 0 is the default value. What does it mean? So 0 means that if there is room to grow, the item will still not do so. So if there was room to grow, the item will still not do so. So any value larger than 0 will be allowed to grow. So like any value larger than 0, which means it's not only a 1 there. Usually we can see a 1 and a 0 and so on, but it could be more. I can show you. For example, now, if we could take this one, the first one over here, if we allow that to grow more than the others, let's see what that would be like. We could say, for example, go in here and say, sorry. My keyboard always switches over to the English keyboard all the time. I don't know why. I must have some shortcut I don't know about. So I'm going here and like write and child, and let's take number 1. We could have said first child as well. But now we have the child. And to make that happen, I think to combine that and really, really make it work, I have to add a @ before, and I can just test this out, I think, background color, and just say red again, so we'll see if it gets marked. It's there, it's 1. So now keep an eye on that one. Let's say I allow every item to grow by 1. But this one, I allow it to grow by 2. What does that mean? What it means is that it's going to grow double the size of the other items. So we could have, just to take this value and we copy it down, and we could say the number 5. So the 5 one, we could say that value should be 0.5. So it's a lot less. So you see the 5 is a lot smaller over here. So we're allowing it to grow at half the speed of the rest. And we're growing this to grow double the speed of the rest. But it's sort of, if there is room to grow, you're allowed to. But you can also say how much each item individually can grow in respect to each siblings. So that is what this code did. Allowed it to grow. And as I said earlier, the default value is not to be allowed to grow. So let's go ahead and look at this, because I think we're ready for the next stage. I'm going to remove these comments. It drops out like this, and then we take this one and we remove them as well. And the next stage is to look at this, which is the 5, and the 5 over here. Okay. Now, I try to remember what happened. We are still using display flex, just as here. We are still using flex direction row, just as up here. And we are using flex grow 0, which we can recall right now that flex grow 0 is the default value of the children. So it looks like it did in the beginning. Now, I've done the same thing as Flexbot did in the beginning, but this time doing it with CSS grid. I'm saying now the display grid should, instead of going row, as you say with Flexbox, you say column, because you're talking about them as individual children. And then instead of saying just keeping it as something I connect to the child and say FlexGrow 1 or FlexGrow 0 and so on, I can actually control this from the parent, which is something I've said earlier. CSS Grid controls more things from the parent than Flexbox does. So it says grid auto columns. Now we're controlling the columns and saying how they are going to, each column is going to look at their size. So we're telling them to each column should be the minimal amount of space it can take, but considering its content. So it's looking at min content, which says it looks at the 12 and sees the 12 is larger, and therefore it doesn't make each size as the same size. But it's not giving it more size than it's required, because it takes the minimum amount of content needed. The opposite, there is something called max content, but basically it doesn't really matter in here, because it's still looking at the content and there's not more inside of it. What max content does, because this might be confusing for a lot of you, I'm going to show you that. Go down here to CSS Grid. Let's go to the 11 here. I'm saying alla talar, till och med inte jag kan tala svenska. Alla talar rolig engelska, which is alla speaks a funny English or something like that. And I do that. I say alla talar rolig engelska. You see it as save. I get that text out there. And if I have max content, it's going to show like this. What min content does, it shows it like this. It looks at the largest single word, and that's the width. And the rest the rest of the size is like taking up different rows like this. Because of that word, it's going to be a different size. So this is what it does. Cannot be smaller than this, because to do so they will have to cut off words, and it's not allowing that. There you go. That's min content for you. and why what it's looking for. But that happens kind of automatically with Flexbox. So if you want that kind of feature, Flexbox gives it automatically. If you don't want that feature, there is more code to write in Flexbox to escape that. So that's a thought you have to carry with you. Sometimes you use Flexbox because it comes out of the box with most of the features that you want. So the defaults are already there. You don't have to change as much code, therefore you use Flexbox. Sometimes Flexbox is horrible because you gotta, escape all the default values that you do not want to get the layout you want. And see, the same goes to CSS Grid. Sometimes CSS Grid is great, and you gotta, but sometimes, some other times you really do like change all the values to actually get a good CSS Grid. So a lot of the picking of which to use depends on the use case.